There is a moment most people experience at least once in their life, and it is one of the most quietly devastating moments a human being can go through. It does not involve a car accident or a sudden diagnosis or the loss of something you can see and touch. It is subtler than that, and in many ways far more damaging. It is the moment you realize that someone you completely trusted, someone you opened yourself to without reservation, someone you believed understood you and valued you, was never fully who you thought they were. And in that moment, something shifts inside you, not just emotionally, psychologically, the way your brain processes other people, the way it calculates risk, the way it decides how much of yourself to reveal. All of it quietly reorganizes itself around that one experience, because trust, once broken at its deepest level, does not simply heal, it transforms you. Now, before you assume this video is going to tell you to become a cold, isolated, suspicious person who builds walls around themselves and lets no one in, stop. That is not what this is about. In fact, that kind of reaction is one of the most psychologically destructive responses a person can have to betrayal, and we will get into exactly why later. What this video is about is something far more nuanced, far more intelligent, and ultimately far more liberating than either blind trust or paranoid suspicion. It is about understanding human nature at a level deep enough that you stop being surprised by it, stop being devastated by it, and start moving through the world with a clarity that most people never develop. The ancient Stoic philosophers had a phrase that translates roughly to this idea: love your neighbor, but do not give them your neck. It sounds harsh when you first hear it, almost cynical. But the more you sit with it, the more you realize it is not cynicism at all. It is one of the most psychologically sophisticated pieces of advice ever articulated. It acknowledges that human beings are capable of genuine connection, genuine warmth, genuine loyalty. And at the same time, it acknowledges that human beings are also driven by forces that even they themselves do not fully understand, forces that can override good intentions in an instant, forces that make even the most well-meaning person capable of betrayal under the right conditions. And that right there is the part most people get wrong. When we think about trust and betrayal, we tend to imagine villains. We imagine people with hidden agendas, people who set out from the beginning to deceive us, people who are fundamentally bad. And sometimes, yes, those people exist, but the research in social psychology tells a completely different story about where most betrayal actually comes from. And it is far more unsettling than the idea of a scheming villain. Because the truth is, the vast majority of the people who hurt you the most in your life were not evil. They were simply human. And understanding that distinction is where everything begins to change. Think about the psychology of self-interest for a moment, not the cartoon version of selfishness where a person twirls their mustache and plots against you. The real biological, deeply wired version that operates in every single human brain, including yours. Neuroscientists who study decision-making have found that the human brain is fundamentally a prediction machine, and what it is always predicting for above almost everything else is its own survival and well-being. This is not a moral failing, it is an evolutionary reality. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human beings who prioritized their own survival and the survival of their immediate circle were the ones who passed on their genes, the ones who were too selfless, too accommodating, too willing to sacrifice themselves for others, who had no genuine reciprocal stake in their welfare. They often did not make it. So your brain and every other human brain around you comes factory installed with a deeply embedded self-prioritization system that operates largely below the level of conscious awareness. This means that the person who swore they would always be there for you was probably telling the complete truth in that moment. Their nervous system was genuinely experiencing loyalty and connection and commitment. But those states are not permanent. They are contextual. They shift when circumstances shift. They shift when that person's own needs become sufficiently urgent. They shift when the cost of honoring their loyalty to you becomes higher than the cost of walking away. And this is not a character flaw unique to the people who have hurt you. It is a feature of human psychology that applies to virtually everyone, including you, in the right conditions, under enough pressure. There is a famous psychological study known as the Milgram experiment. And while most people have heard of it in the context of obedience to authority, its deeper implications for trust are almost never discussed. In that experiment, ordinary people, not criminals, not sociopaths, not unusually cruel individuals, were shown to be capable of inflicting what they believed was serious harm on another person simply because of social pressure and situational context. The point is not that people are secretly evil. The point is that behavior is far more situational than we like to believe. The same person who would genuinely sacrifice for you under normal circumstances might behave in a way that devastates you when certain pressures are applied. And here is the disturbing part. They might not even fully understand why they did it. This is what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, and it is one of the most well-documented biases in all of cognitive science. It refers to our tendency to explain other people's behavior in terms of their character rather than their circumstances. When someone betrays us, we tell ourselves they are a bad person. When we ourselves do something we are not proud of, we explain it through circumstances. We were stressed, we were scared, we had no choice. The reality is that for most people, most of the time, circumstances explain far more than character does. And the moment you truly internalize that truth, you stop being a naive idealist about human nature, and you stop being a bitter cynic about it either. You land somewhere in the middle, somewhere psychologically rare and genuinely powerful. But here is where it gets even more interesting, because the problem with trust is not just about the people around you and their capacity for self-interest. The problem also lies inside you, specifically inside the way your brain constructs the image of the people you trust. There is a phenomenon in psychology called idealization, and it is so common, so automatic, so deeply embedded in the way human beings form attachments that virtually no one escapes it. When you begin to trust someone deeply, when you open up, when you feel safe, when you feel seen and valued, your brain does something remarkable and quietly deceptive. It begins to fill in the gaps. The parts of that person you do not know, the parts they have never shown you, the parts that remain hidden. Your brain automatically populates those spaces with positive assumptions, with the qualities you hope are there, with the version of that person that would be most consistent with how safe and good this relationship feels. And this is why betrayal so often feels like meeting a stranger, because in a very real psychological sense you are. The person who betrayed you was never the complete person you trusted. You trusted a composite part of them, part of your own constructed image of them. And when reality eventually reveals what was behind those gaps, the shock is not just about what they did. It is about the sudden collapse of the narrative your own mind had been building. This is not a reason to distrust your perceptions entirely. It is a reason to hold them with a certain kind of intelligent humility. To remember that no matter how well you know someone, there are dimensions of that person you will never fully access. There are pressures you cannot anticipate. There are needs they may not even be fully aware of themselves. And the person who tells you they are completely transparent, completely reliable, completely incapable of ever letting you down, that person is either deeply self-deceived or they are not telling you the full truth. And the unsettling question that follows from all of this is one that most people are never brave enough to ask themselves directly. If trust at its deepest and most complete level carries this kind of inherent psychological risk, if even the most genuine relationships contain these unavoidable blind spots and human limitations, then what is the right way to move through a world full of other people? What does intelligent, psychologically aware trust actually look like? And perhaps more importantly, what does the research say about the people who seem to navigate this question most successfully? The ones who are neither crushed by betrayal nor isolated by suspicion, but who maintain rich, meaningful relationships while somehow protecting their own psychological core? The answer involves something that most people would not expect, something that reaches back through philosophy, through neuroscience, through the behavioral patterns of some of the most resilient and emotionally sophisticated people who have ever lived. And it begins with understanding a particular kind of psychological trap, one that you may already be caught in without realizing it. There is a concept in psychology that does not get nearly enough attention, and it may be one of the most important ideas you ever encounter when it comes to understanding why trust goes wrong, not out there in the world, but inside your own mind. It is called emotional fusion, and it describes the state in which your sense of identity, your emotional stability, and your psychological well-being become so deeply entangled with another person that you lose the ability to function as an independent psychological unit. Now, that might sound extreme. You might think that only describes codependent relationships or toxic dynamics, but the research tells a very different story. Emotional fusion exists on a spectrum, and most people, in at least one significant relationship in their life, slide much further along that spectrum than they realize. When you fully trust someone, when you hand over your emotional safety to them without reservation, what you are often doing, without being aware of it, is outsourcing a part of your own psychological architecture. You are allowing another person to become the foundation on which your sense of security rests. And as long as that person behaves consistently, as long as they meet your expectations, as long as they remain the version of themselves that your brain constructed through idealization, everything feels stable. But the moment they deviate, the moment they act in a way that contradicts the role you assigned them, the ground does not just shake, it disappears. Because you were not standing on your own ground, you were standing on them. This is why some betrayals feel literally like dying, not metaphorically. The nervous system actually processes certain forms of relational betrayal using the same neural pathways that process physical pain. Neuroscience research out of the University of Michigan showed that social rejection activates the same regions of the brain, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, that light up during acute physical pain. Your brain does not distinguish between being stabbed and being emotionally abandoned by someone you deeply trusted. To your nervous system, the threat is equally real. And when your identity has been fused with that person, when your trust was total and unconditional, the pain is not just about losing them. It is about losing the part of yourself that you built around them. This is the trap, and it is a trap that well-meaning advice about trust makes worse, not better. We live in a culture that romanticizes complete vulnerability. That tells you the deepest form of love is the one where you hold nothing back, where you give yourself entirely, where you trust without limits. And there is something beautiful about that ideal, genuinely beautiful. But there is also something psychologically dangerous about it, and no one talks about the danger because it feels cynical to do so. It feels unromantic. It feels like you are diminishing the purity of human connection. But the truth is that complete, unreserved, unconditional trust in another human being is not a sign of emotional strength. It is, in many cases, a sign of emotional outsourcing. And the distinction between those two things is one of the most important distinctions you will ever learn. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote about this nearly 2,000 years ago, and what he said was remarkably ahead of its time from a psychological standpoint. He said that you should not trust someone before you have evaluated them, and you should not evaluate them before you have trusted them to some degree. This sounds like a paradox, but it is actually a precise description of what psychologists now call calibrated trust. Trust that is given in stages, trust that is responsive to evidence, trust that deepens as it is earned and contracts when it is violated, not as a form of game playing, not as manipulation, but as a form of intelligent self-awareness, a recognition that human beings reveal themselves over time, and that the picture you have of someone on day one is never the complete picture. Think about how most people actually build trust in practice, and you will notice something troubling. It usually does not follow this calibrated pattern at all. What happens instead is that trust is driven primarily by emotion. You meet someone, something clicks, you feel a sense of recognition, of chemistry, of ease, and because those feelings are so powerful, so intoxicating, so neurochemically compelling, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin all flooding your system simultaneously, your brain essentially fast-tracks trust. It skips the evaluation stage entirely. You go from stranger to confident in weeks, from acquaintance to soulmate in months, and the entire process is driven not by data, not by evidence, not by realistic assessment of who this person is and what they are capable of under pressure, but by how good they make you feel. And the people who are most skilled at making you feel good, charming people, charismatic people, emotionally intuitive people, are sometimes the most dangerous people to fast-track trust with, not because charm is inherently malicious, it is not, but because charm disarms exactly the parts of your psychology that are designed to protect you. It lowers your defenses before you have enough information to know whether lowering them is safe. This is why con artists are charming. It is why cult leaders are magnetic. It is why the people who cause the most damage in your life are almost never the ones who seem threatening from the beginning. They are the ones who seemed wonderful, the ones you never would have suspected. And that is not a coincidence. That is how the psychology works. Now, there is a critical nuance here that separates what I am saying from paranoia. Paranoia says nobody can be trusted. Paranoia says that behind every smile is a hidden motive. Paranoia is psychologically exhausting, socially isolating, and factually incorrect. The truth is that most people around you are not out to harm you. Most people are genuinely decent. Most people, most of the time, behave well, not because they are angels, but because their circumstances allow them to. The key insight, the one that changes everything, is not that people are bad. It is that people are conditional. Their goodness, their loyalty, their reliability, these things are real, but they are not fixed properties like eye color or height. They fluctuate. They respond to pressure, to incentive, to feared opportunity. And the mistake most people make is treating these qualities as constants when they are actually variables. History is full of examples that illustrate this principle with devastating clarity. Consider the countless political alliances throughout history that were built on what both sides genuinely believed was unshakable trust, only to collapse the moment strategic interest shifted. Consider the business partnerships where lifelong friends destroyed each other when money entered the equation. Consider even the personal relationships of some of the most admired figures in history. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, a man whose writings reveal one of the most psychologically developed minds in human history, was betrayed by people in his own circle, not because he was naive, but because he understood that no amount of wisdom makes you immune to the fundamental variability of human behavior. What made Marcus different was not that he avoided betrayal. It was that he did not allow it to destroy him. He expected it as a feature of the human landscape, and he structured his inner life accordingly. And this is where we get to something that most self-improvement content completely misses. The question is not how to avoid untrustworthy people. You cannot do that with perfect reliability because untrustworthy behavior is not a permanent category of person. It is a situational response that almost anyone can exhibit under the right conditions. The real question, the far more powerful question, is how to build a psychological structure inside yourself that allows you to engage deeply with other human beings without making your survival dependent on their consistency. There is a concept in attachment theory that maps perfectly onto this idea. Psychologists who study adult attachment have identified a style called secure attachment, and it is often misunderstood. People think secure attachment means you trust easily and everything works out. That is not what it means at all. Secure attachment means you have the ability to form deep bonds while simultaneously maintaining a stable internal sense of self. It means you can love someone without needing them to complete you. You can trust someone without requiring them to never disappoint you. You can open yourself to connection while keeping your psychological foundation rooted in your own identity rather than in the other person's behavior. And the research consistently shows that people with this attachment style are not less connected than others. They are actually more connected. Their relationships are deeper, more honest, more resilient, precisely because they are not held together by desperation or idealization. They are held together by choice. But here is the uncomfortable question that follows from that. How do you develop this kind of attachment style if you did not grow up with it? How do you move from being someone who either trusts too much or trusts too little to being someone who trusts intelligently? How do you retrain a nervous system that has been conditioned by experience, by childhood, by past relationships, by betrayals that scarred you in ways you still carry, to respond to the world not with blind openness and not with rigid defensiveness, but with something more sophisticated than either? The answer is not simple, but it is knowable, and it starts with a psychological skill that almost no one is ever taught explicitly, a skill that is not about reading other people better, though that is part of it. It is about reading yourself. Specifically, it is about understanding the signals your own emotions send you when trust is being formed, and learning to distinguish between the signals that reflect genuine safety and the signals that reflect your own unmet needs projecting themselves onto another person. Because those two things, genuine safety and need-based projection, feel almost identical from the inside. They produce similar warmth, similar excitement, similar conviction that this person is different. This time is different. This relationship is the one that will finally be what you have been looking for. And the inability to tell the difference between them is quietly the single biggest reason people get devastated by trust again and again. There is a specific pattern that emerges in the research on this, and once you see it, you will recognize it everywhere in your own life, in the lives of people around you, in stories and histories and patterns that suddenly make a new kind of sense. It involves a very particular psychological dynamic between two forces inside you, one that wants to see the truth and one that desperately wants to believe the story. And which one wins in any given moment determines not just who you trust, but how deeply you suffer when that trust breaks, what that pattern looks like, and how the people who master it manage to build genuinely trustworthy lives without ever handing over the keys to their own destruction. That is where this all comes together. The pattern is deceptively simple once you see it, but it operates beneath the surface of almost every trust decision you have ever made. It works like this. When you encounter someone who triggers a strong positive emotional response in you, someone who makes you feel seen, valued, understood, safe, two systems in your brain activate simultaneously. The first is your evaluation system. This is the part of your prefrontal cortex responsible for rational assessment, for pattern recognition, for weighing evidence and making judgments based on observable behavior over time. The second is your attachment system. This is older, deeper, more emotionally driven. It lives in the limbic structures of your brain, and its primary concern is not accuracy. Its primary concern is connection. It wants to bond. It wants to belong. It wants to find someone or something to anchor to because, from an evolutionary standpoint, isolation. Now, here's the critical problem. These two systems do not operate with equal power. In most people, most of the time, the attachment system overwhelms the evaluation system, not slightly, dramatically. The neurochemical cascade triggered by the feeling of connection, the dopamine, the oxytocin, the endogenous opioids that flood your brain when you feel emotionally close to someone, these chemicals do not just make you feel good. They actively suppress the critical thinking functions of your prefrontal cortex. This is not metaphor. This is measurable neuroscience. When you are in the grip of deep emotional connection, your brain literally becomes less capable of objective evaluation. You see fewer red flags. You dismiss inconsistency. You explain away behaviors that if you observe them in someone else's relationship, you would immediately recognize as warning signs. Your attachment system is essentially drugging your evaluation system into silence. And this is exactly the moment when people make the decision to fully trust. Not when they have the most information, not when they have observed consistent behavior across a range of situations over a meaningful period of time. They make the decision to fully trust when they are neurochemically compromised, when the very system designed to protect them has been temporarily disabled by the system designed to bond them. If you designed a security protocol this way for a bank or a military installation, it would be considered catastrophically flawed. But as a species, we do this with our most valuable psychological assets, our emotional safety, our sense of self, our deepest vulnerabilities, every single day. The people who navigate trust most successfully are not people who have figured out how to suppress their attachment system. That would make them cold, disconnected, unable to experience the depth of human intimacy that makes life meaningful. What they have figured out, either through painful experience or through deliberate psychological development, is how to keep their evaluation system online even when their attachment system is activated. They feel the pull of connection. They enjoy it. They allow it. But they do not let it silence the quieter voice in their mind that says, I feel close to this person and I want to understand more about who they really are before I build my life around them. This is not suspicion. This is not holding people at arm's length. This is a form of respect for yourself and for the other person. Because when you fully trust someone before you have genuinely seen them in a range of situations, you are not actually trusting them. You are trusting the image of them that your attachment system constructed during a period of neurochemical intoxication. And that image is almost never complete. It cannot be, because human beings do not reveal themselves all at once. They reveal themselves through friction, through disagreement, through moments of stress, through how they behave when they are afraid, when they are threatened, when they are offered an opportunity that serves them at your expense. These are the moments that show you who someone is, and these moments almost never occur during the honeymoon phase of any relationship, whether romantic, professional, or platonic. There is a reason the ancient philosophers placed such enormous emphasis on time as a component of trust. Aristotle distinguished between three types of friendship: friendships of utility, friendships of pleasure, and friendships of virtue, and he argued that only the third kind, the kind based on mutual recognition of each other's genuine character, could serve as a foundation for real trust. But he also argued that this kind of friendship is exceedingly rare and takes a very long time to develop, not because people are slow to reveal goodness, but because character is only truly visible across time and circumstances. Anyone can be generous when they have abundance. Anyone can be loyal when loyalty costs them nothing. Anyone can be honest when the truth is convenient. What tells you who a person really is, or more accurately, who they are likely to be under pressure, is how they behave when generosity requires sacrifice, when loyalty has a price, when honesty puts them at a disadvantage. And this brings us to a principle that sounds paradoxical, but is psychologically one of the most stabilizing truths you can internalize. The principle is this: you should never fully trust anyone. And this is not a limitation on love. It is what makes real love possible. Because when you release the expectation that another person must be perfectly and permanently reliable in order for you to love them, you free yourself from a contract that no human being can actually fulfill. You stop setting people up to fail. You stop constructing pedestals and then being shattered when real, flawed, complicated human beings cannot stay balanced on them. You begin to love people as they actually are: inconsistent, self-interested some of the time, generous other times, capable of extraordinary kindness, and also capable of letting you down in ways they themselves could not have predicted. This is what the Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius practiced every single morning. In his private journal, the one we now call Meditations, he wrote that he would begin each day by reminding himself that he would encounter people who were ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, and envious. He did not write this because he hated people. He wrote it because he understood that expecting perfection from human beings is a recipe for perpetual suffering. By starting his day with a realistic assessment of human nature, he was not hardening himself, he was freeing himself, he was making space for genuine compassion, because when someone behaved poorly, it did not shatter his worldview. It confirmed what he already knew about the complexity of being human, and from that place of acceptance, he could respond with wisdom rather than react with devastation. This is the psychological architecture of resilience: not walls, not armor, not isolation, but a deep, honest, unflinching understanding of what human beings are, which is neither all good nor all bad, but a constantly shifting mixture of both, driven by circumstances, neurochemistry, unresolved wounds, unconscious needs, and countless other forces that even the most self-aware person can only partially see in themselves. When you operate from this understanding, you do not become cynical. Cynicism is what happens when an idealist gets hurt and refuses to update their model. They flip from believing everyone is good to believing everyone is bad, and both positions are equally naive. What you become instead is something rarer and far more powerful. You become psychologically literate. You learn to read situations not through the lens of hope and not through the lens of fear, but through the lens of honest observation. And from that place, something remarkable happens to your relationships. They do not become colder. They become more real. When you stop needing someone to be perfect in order to trust them, you can actually see them. You can appreciate their genuine qualities without inflating them. You can acknowledge their limitations without being destroyed by them. You can hold space for the full complexity of who they are. And in doing so, you create something that total blind trust never actually produces. You create a relationship built on truth rather than on fantasy. And relationships built on truth can withstand things that relationships built on fantasy never survive. There is also a deeply practical dimension to this that affects your everyday life in ways you might not immediately see. When you operate with calibrated trust, when you give trust in proportion to evidence and adjust it based on behavior rather than emotion, you become significantly harder to manipulate. Not because you are guarded, but because you are paying attention. You notice when someone's words consistently diverge from their actions. You notice when someone only shows vulnerability that serves a strategic purpose. You notice when generosity comes with invisible strings attached. These patterns are not difficult to see. They're only difficult to see when your attachment system has already decided that this person is safe and your evaluation system has been chemically muted. And perhaps most importantly, when you stop fully trusting others with your psychological foundation, you are forced to do something that is uncomfortable but ultimately transformative. You are forced to build that foundation inside yourself. You are forced to develop what psychologists call an internal locus of validation, a sense of worth, identity, and emotional stability that does not depend on any external person behaving in a particular way. This is not arrogance. This is not self-sufficiency as isolation. This is the recognition that the only person who will be with you for every single moment of your life is you. Every other person, no matter how loving, no matter how loyal, is a guest in your experience. They may stay for decades. They may leave tomorrow. And your ability to survive and thrive cannot be contingent on which of those outcomes occurs. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi applies here in a way that most people in the West never consider. Wabi-sabi is the aesthetic and philosophical appreciation of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. It finds beauty not in flawlessness, but in the cracks, the wear, the inevitable decay that time brings to all things. When you apply this philosophy to human relationships, something profound shifts. You stop demanding that trust be permanent and total. You start seeing the beauty in connections that are real precisely because they are imperfect. You start appreciating the courage it takes for two flawed, self-interested, neurochemically volatile human beings to choose each other repeatedly, not because they have guaranteed each other perfection, but because they have accepted each other's humanity. This is the deepest lesson embedded in the idea that you should never fully trust anyone. It is not a lesson about other people. It is a lesson about you, about the stories you tell yourself, about the expectations you carry without examining them, about the parts of your own psychology that seek completion through others because you have not yet learned to be complete on your own. When you fully trust someone, what you are often really doing is asking them to carry a weight that belongs to you, the weight of your own self-worth, your own emotional regulation, your own sense of meaning and purpose. And no human being, no matter how extraordinary, can carry that weight for you indefinitely. Eventually, they will set it down, not necessarily because they are cruel, but because it was never theirs to carry. So the next time you feel the pull to give yourself completely to someone, to hand over your full trust without reservation, pause. Not to be suspicious, not to play games, but to ask yourself honestly what you are really doing in that moment. Are you recognizing genuine safety based on sustained evidence? Or are you seeking relief from the discomfort of being responsible for your own psychological well-being? The answer to that question will tell you more about the health of your trust than anything the other person could ever say or do. And if you have been hurt before, if you are watching this because someone shattered a trust you thought was sacred, know this: the pain you experienced was real and you did not deserve it. But the lesson it offered you, if you are willing to receive it, is one of the most valuable lessons a human being can learn. Not that people are bad, not that love is dangerous, but that you are strong enough to hold your own center, to love without losing yourself, to trust without abandoning your own judgment, and to walk through a complicated, beautiful, heartbreaking, imperfect world with your eyes fully open and your heart still intact. That is not cynicism, that is wisdom. And it is the kind of wisdom that does not make your life smaller. It makes your life genuinely, deeply, unshakably yours. If this video shifted something in how you see trust and human connection, take a moment to hit the like button. It helps more people find these ideas when they need them most. If you are not yet subscribed, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you do not miss what is coming next, because the topics ahead go even deeper into the psychology of how you can protect your peace while building the kind of relationships that actually last. Drop a comment below and tell me about a moment when your understanding of trust changed. I read every single one, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if you want to keep going, there is a video on screen right now that connects directly to everything we just explored. Click it. Your future self will thank you.